economist at Iowa State. Lee has been doing the roadshow for quite a while and usually does a outlook for us. I'm going to change it up a little bit this year and talk more about the CME cutout contract and also some updates to the insurance risk management programs.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Jamie, and thanks for everyone for coming. Yeah, it happens to be a year that we're kind of optimistic about prices, that I'm not giving the rosy outlook, but I think the discussion of where we're at in the markets certainly highlights the need to evaluate possible options when it comes to risk management. Here is what you may be familiar with. The Iowa State estimated returns model kind of gives us a barometer of profitability. And what we see is 2020 certainly looks to be 2021 certainly looks to be a better year than 2020. We all know what transpired in 2020. But the big difference that we're facing this year, maybe compared to 2020 or 2019, or even earlier than that, is this dramatic change in feed costs. So here, my calculations show that we're just south of a $30 per head increase in cost of production. That's roughly a 20% increase in cost of production. So it's not just the lean hog price that we're necessarily concerned with, and what has been really the focus the last several years as we're facing relatively low production costs. We're seeing that big uptick here. So when I look at prices, they're forecasted to be higher than last year, obviously, and higher than 2019. But the big change here is the feed cost situation. When we look at what happened last year, I think that also motivates evaluating risk management strategies. That middle blue section there between the two blue lines shows what you could have effectively hedged for all your sales in 2020. Now, there's a lot of assumptions behind this. So again, just kind of look at it as a barometer. But late 2019, early 2020, there was an opportunity to lock in a profit for all of 2020. Then we know what transpired, and we've seen a significant decrease in lean hog prices until August, September time period. And now we've seen an increase in production costs. Now here in 2021, it's not necessarily a replay, but there is some modest profitability offered out there. So how do we take advantage of what the market is currently offering us, both from a lean hog standpoint and our feed cost situation? Now, it's not necessarily that easy, because really when you look at profitability, what differentiated producers last year was how I sold my hogs. And so here, what I did was I took that profitability model. I said, what if we sold hogs all negotiated last year? Or what if we sold them under the other market formula, which is using a base price of futures or options, or the swine or pork market formula, which uses based on formula like a Western Corn Belt or Iowa Southern Minnesota negotiated price, and maybe some combination of the pork cutout or one or the other, and then the other purchase arrangement, which is kind of a catch-all for all those other ones. Now you'll see that there's quite a bit of difference comparing those profits in 2020, where negotiated it was loss on average of $30 per head, upwards to kind of close to break even or some modest profitability based on some of those other formulas. Now, when we look nationally how hogs are sold, most producers sold hogs, or the majority, just from a percentage standpoint, are in the swine or pork market formula. So that wasn't the highest price last year. That was in the other purchase agreement, but those are a lot of times higher production costs. So there's a reason there's higher prices there. Actually, what are the highest percentage are packer-owned hogs. And so as we've added packing capacity over the last several years in the form of new packing plants and some additional ramp up of existing plants, a lot of those have been packer-owned hogs. And so that's roughly 35% to 40% here, what we've seen last year. Now, the next few slides, I just want to highlight how USDA defines some of these purchasing types, because I think that's important as we talk about the need for this pork cutout contract. So negotiated and negotiated formula for me are the easiest to understand because that's negotiation between buyer and seller, either on that exact price or a formula to help derive that price. Then when we get to the other market formula, this is where we're using the futures or options to help us develop that base price. And to give you an example here, all we need is the nearby lean hog futures price the day prior to delivery. And then the other terms in that formula would be, I'm just going to take that base price, that nearby futures a day prior to delivery, a contract premium. Sometimes in these formulas, it's called a basis, and that's $2 in this particular formula, and then any adjustments for carcass merit. Now, that most popular formula, at least from a percentage of hogs sold, is the swine or pork market formula. And this can take a lot of different forms. An example here is where I'm going to use the 203 report, which is the national negotiated price 3 days prior to delivery. And then I'm going to use the pork carcass cutout, which is the negotiated cutout value. And that's, again, 3 days prior to delivery. So to determine this price, I'm going to take 50% of that negotiated weighted average and 50% of that cutout weighted average. And then we're going to make some adjustments to that and then add any carcass merit premiums or discounts. And then finally, the other purchase arrangement. This is a catch-all for all formulas that don't fit precisely in those other buckets that I've already talked about. And I like to think about these as these are typically higher cost of production hogs. For example, in April 2016, USDA moved the hogs that had a premium for non-beta agonist into this bucket. Also, this would be where a lot of the non-carcass merit premiums hogs are. So any adjustments for antibiotic free, for housing, for diet, so on and so forth would show up in this category here. So where did I get all this information? And there's a lot more available. Well, it's in the swine contract library available from USDA. So a lot is talked about transparency of information, of prices, and the such to help understand the price discovery in the market. This is a major step in that direction. So you can go on this website and pull up by region all the formulas that are offered out there to kind of give you a snapshot of the formulas for other market formula, swine or pork market formula, and other purchase arrangement. These files are long because there's a lot of different formulas being offered out there. It doesn't say who is getting that formula or how many hogs are sold on that formula, but it gives you kind of the diversity of the formulas available. What it also doesn't tell you is if that formula was agreed to 3 years ago or 5 years ago, or if it's kind of based on current market conditions, because we know those change all the time. I have a project with Dermot Hayes at Iowa State that we're looking to extract this information. So one could say, all right, we're going to choose this formula. How did that perform over the last X number of years? And that will help you understand it's not a perfect predictor of the future, but if you see one formula consistently performs better, it may help you understand where you need to go when we're negotiating formulas going forward. But it doesn't say that that formula would necessarily be offered again upon renegotiation. Another report that I really like to look at is this 215 report. So this is the distribution of hog prices last Thursday. Did anyone sell hogs last Thursday? February 11th. I like it when there's one person in there because I can guarantee that the price you sold was between $52 per hundredweight and $100 per hundredweight. Also, why I can guarantee that's a pretty large range, right? So it's going to really catch all those hogs. Now, this distribution is by how a producer sold those hogs or how a packer purchased those hogs. So on the far left, 52 to 54, those were a small share of negotiated and swine or pork market formula hogs. On the top end, that's a green bar. It's hard to see, but that's other purchase arrangement. So if I was a betting man, I would say those 98 to 100 had a lot of premiums associated with them, right? It was probably a bundle of attributes that got me that much higher price, but that's a much higher cost of production as well. The average price was in that 70 to about 80 range when you look at the various weighted average prices. So again, this kind of shows you how my prices are performing relative to others in the marketplace. But there's a lot of reasons why we see that large distribution there. So why does that matter? How does that help motivate the pork cutout contract? Well, prior to 2019, prices moved very much in tandem, whether it be the lean hog index, the pork cutout, or various cuts involved. Regardless of how I sold my hogs, they were very correlated. So it means they moved together. Now, since then, we see that negotiated prices especially have separated from the pack, as well as to some degree the swine or pork market formula, because it has negotiated purchases in there to help us derive that formula. You can really see it in 2020, right? Especially in April, June, and July, that negotiated price was much lower than the rest of prices. Now, typically in the fourth quarter of the year, you do see some separation, even if you go back historically there, because fourth quarter, we bump up against that capacity and it bids those negotiated hogs down, but nothing to the degree that we've seen recently. And we've seen that separation greater between the cutout value and that negotiated. So if you have a price that's based on swine and pork market formula, you have two driving factors there. No bigger example was last May, where pork cutout is that black spike there in that line, as well as the decrease in the blue line. So you're kind of getting two different market signals there. And that's kind of contradicting on that price discovery, right? So here is what wholesale values are doing. Here's what hog values are doing. Now there's an economic explanation for why that happened, right? We had reduced shackle space. The demand for hogs was lower. We were producing for a short period of time less pork. And so that was being rationed, and you've seen higher prices there. But what that did to the price discovery process is, again, you had these two different signals, and depending on how I priced hogs, that drastically impacted my revenue. And also it has implications for protecting that price risk I have out there. So since 2019, those correlations have broken down. We compare the pork cutout to how hogs are sold or that lean hog index. So the pork cutout contract, this isn't necessarily new in the sense that the industry's been talking about it for a long time. And dating back to 2015, the CME put out the pork cutout contract index because they need historical data over time. And so this has been talked about for some time. Now, hopefully I've convinced you, or on the way to convincing you, that really prior to 2019, there wasn't a huge need for this contract because those prices moved in tandem. But since we've seen some separation there and the greater demand or need for a cutout contract to protect what type of risk I have in the marketplace. Now the contract first began trading November 9th. That's my mom's birthday. So that's one thing I can always remember. Also easy to remember here is you have the same size, tick value, and contract months as the lean hog contract. Contract is cash settled just like lean hogs, but here we're cash settling to the negotiated pork cutout value that's released by USDA. A lot of information about this contract from various various CME websites and other trading firm websites to give additional information. So what does this contract provide? Well, it provides something different, and it's needed because of those changes in prices. So for producers, you can directly price hogs that are priced off the cutout contract, or the majority of the formula is derived from that cutout contract. Now, packers, they sell pork, right, in the form of various cuts, wholesale pork, and they don't sell hogs. And so here's a derivative where they can directly hedge their revenues. Also, what we learned during COVID, and I think is very apparent, is there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice a carcass. And so because those cuts are obviously more correlated with the pork cutout, because that's what makes up the pork cutout, here it's a better derivative for hedging the risk of various movements and various cuts. Because we know, for example, the belly is very volatile at times. Well, that volatility is going to be better captured in the pork cutout contract than it is in the lean hog contract. And then buyers or end users, here again, they're buying pork, not hogs. And so this is a derivative that more matches what they're purchasing. There was a great comment yesterday when I gave this presentation that you could actually hedge the spread between two of these, because you would expect that they would stay relatively correlated, the pork cutout contract and the lean hog contract. Now, we have historical data because we have index for both. And so if those are getting out of what we would expect for percentages of each other, you could trade that in the expectation that it would go back to more of those historical norms. Now, that's not necessarily, I think that's definitely more advanced than what I want to highlight today, but I think that's a way that we could potentially see some increased initial volume in this contract. So some potential hitches here, and I don't want to say these are negatives, maybe just potential hiccups is, it's a new contract. And anytime you have something new, it's a little bit more complicated. I can speak for myself. I'm always a late adopter of everything. I want to see how it works. I want to see how other people, tell me how it works. And so I think that's why we've seen, less uptake. But again, I don't know what the metric is for success of this contract. I don't know if we're ahead or behind what we thought we'd see for volume of use here. Now, there's two different contracts available right now. You have the lean hog contract and the pork cutout contract. Likely, I'm going to use one or the other, unless I'm trading that spread, for example. And so we're going to pull away volume open interest from the lean hog contract. Does that cannibalize that contract? I think we don't know the answer to that. I think, the fact that CME released the contract, they don't believe so, that these will be two viable contracts. But, a couple of examples here, the May contract in lean hogs isn't used all that much, right? It just go to the June contract. So, already we're seeing some kind of limited use in the lean hog contract. Do we move away from that? Now, if the lean hog contract still stays viable and you have this pork cutout contract, some potential changes need to be made to the lean hog contract, because right now it is cash settled for a weighted average of negotiated hogs, which you would expect, and then the swine or pork market formula. That swine or pork market formula has negotiated hogs in it, but it also has hogs that are sold based on the pork cutout. And so if you want this to go back to just a hog contract, you would need to break up that swine or pork market formula. That would require a change to livestock mandatory reporting, because USDA would need to be told to say we would have to break these two apart, and you'd have formula swine and formula pork discovered hogs. It's currently not done. I think that would, if that were to happen, that's going to fix a lot of issues that we've seen in basis. If I go back here, at times because of something like this, right? And an extreme example was last May, but at times that has become very separate, and that's where you're seeing the extreme variability in basis levels. We've talked about selling futures, be it lean hogs or the pork cutout contract. The two other risk management tactics I want to talk about today are livestock risk protection, where it's protecting the hog price, or livestock gross margin, where it's a margin between hogs, corn, and soybean meal. The reason I want to highlight these is because we've seen some updates to these insurance products here recently. If we look back historically, it's been limited use when you look at LGM and LRP. So back to 2003, on average, it's less than 1% of the swine out there have utilized LRP and LGM together. Now, LGM, if you look here, the pink bars on your left, that is swine. So primarily that is a swine product. Dairy is not included. Dairy is a big product for LGM, probably the biggest product. Sells out every month that it's offered. LRP is across a variety of commodities, but you'll see that they've kind of decreased the number of head the last couple of years. And that's kind of the impetus for why we've seen some updates to these products. Now, what explains some of that decreased use, I think, is when you look at the loss ratio. So that's just indemnities divided by premiums. Well, for LRP, that's below 1. So what's happened is you've paid in more than it's paid out. For LGM, it's actually the flip of that. It's paid out more than that's paid in, but the degree has decreased over the last 10 years or so. When you look by state, you're likely, again, to pick one or the other. And we've seen LGM has primarily been an Iowa product, especially for the first 10 years it was released. As of late, you've seen it, other states increase use there. LRP has primarily been used in Minnesota, with other states taking a back seat from a percentage of use. So because of the limited uptake, USDA has really targeted enhancements to these programs to make them very competitive and attractive to producers. Advantage of the insurance products is you don't have to meet contract specifications. So you can insure up to 1 head. So it is generally more attractive for smaller producers because you can do the same thing that these policies are offering on the CME. So for LRP, it's just buying an at the money or out of the money put. And for LGM, it's buying a put as well as buying calls on corn and soybean meal. So one big change is they've increased the subsidy levels. LRP, depending on the coverage levels, you've seen subsidies 35 to 55%. So what's that say? Well, it's less costly to buy LRP than what you could do yourself buying a put on the futures market. LGM has also seen the subsidies increase depending on the deductible you're willing to take. You can get subsidy from 18 to 50%. Some additional changes to LRP has been increase the endorsements from 20,000 head to 40,000 head and 150,000 head annually. The endorsement lengths are now out to 52 weeks. They used to be out to 26 weeks, so they effectively doubled that. And in doing that, they've defined some new swine types that you can insure swine that haven't even been born yet, similar to what you can do on the futures market. So if you see attractive prices out there, you can insure that without having the commodity quite yet. They've modified some livestock ownership. I think one of the biggest changes is you pay the premium after the endorsement period. So after the sale of those hogs, when it's easiest to cash flow, paying that premium, regardless of if you have an indemnity or not. So if you have an indemnity, it would cover that loss. And even if you don't have an indemnity, it would be because prices have performed at or better than you expected. So I think that's a big benefit to paying that premium later. So important to remember that like any price risk management strategy, there's no silver bullet here. And it's going to protect, it's going to offer reasonable protection against financial risks of price or income. So as we look at last year, all of these products would have helped last year, but there was several issues too. We've seen large basis levels. That's not going to protect all the risks out there in the marketplace, but it certainly would have helped. I list some available resources from RMA as well as Iowa Farm Bureau on some of the coverage and premium estimators out there. Iowa State, we release a weekly crush margin. So I updated this model yesterday. So this is kind of looking at similar to LGM, but we also have a pig price in here. Why I highlight this is to show you that at times you're going to see some coverage levels out there and some policies that allow you to lock in a profit effectively. But there's times that they won't be available because LGM is based on puts and calls on CME. So if you see the next 6 months here or so, there's offer and profitability. Whereas as you get into the fall, the crush margin is below that red line, which says kind of covers everything else. So you're going to see policies that are reflective of the market and are not going to be able to guarantee a profit in these. Now, they are subsidized, so they are possibly more attractive than what is currently you could do on the futures market. And we've seen this increase over the last several weeks here. So we could be heading into territory where even fourth quarter, you could be seeing some attractive prices out there to do something in the form of price risk management. Final thing I want to end with is a change that USDA has made to reporting. And I think this has various implications. So in their press release in November, they indicated that they were moving all the regional reports, the 204 is the Iowa, Minnesota report, to the 218, to have it in a one-stop shop, a convenient report, which is a great idea. So you don't have to pull up the Western Corn Belt, Eastern Corn Belt, Iowa, Minnesota, national, and put all that information together. It's already done for you. But also what was done because of confidentiality restrictions is they made some change to that regional reporting. So for Iowa, Minnesota, and the rest of the regionals, we no longer have the number of head count and negotiated. We also don't have the weighted average. So you can't back calculate to know the number of head in negotiated. But they've also added some detail to that other market formula as well as other purchase arrangement. So the implications there are when you pull up this report that you don't have a daily or prior day Iowa, Minnesota negotiated hog price. You have a 5-day rolling average Iowa, Minnesota negotiated hog price now. So if any formulas use the negotiated 3 days prior or day prior for Iowa, Minnesota, and the regions, those are going to have to be altered because USDA is no longer reporting that data. Now, for me, the biggest implication was the weighted average. So I use the weighted average in any of the basis estimates, or if I'm reflecting what are Iowa producers receiving for a hog price, the weighted average is the best estimate of that. That's no longer available from a regional standpoint. It's available only from a national standpoint. So in steady market conditions, that's probably not a big deal, right? We don't see a big variation. Iowa, Minnesota is almost 50% of the market anyway. When you get into scenarios like we experienced last year, there can be potentially big regional differences. And that's where the value of having much more detailed regional data is there. We continue to see fewer and fewer negotiated hogs. And so this isn't a surprise. I think, and we're not going to see USDA go back and be able to report this information because of that thin market. So it's something to be aware of. And I highlight this because, USDA very much listens to industry. And they have to marry that with what they can be able to release because of the confidentiality restrictions that they face. But if there is information that's needed, they're always making revisions. And the pork industry has done a great job to tell them what they need. And USDA has also done a great job in responding to and providing that information. So I'd encourage you to keep that up. So with that, I'll highlight, there's a lot of outlook information, which I didn't present, available at several of these websites.